Welcome back, listeners, to That's a Good Card. Today, y'all will have the challenge of getting me to say, that's a good card. While y'all will be doing the convincing, I'll be playing the devil's advocate. And stay tuned for some laughs in our closing segment, That's a Good Card, ? Also, now's a good time to remind you to hit that subscribe button if you're listening to us on YouTube, and please leave a comment below with your suggestion for our next card. All right, y'all, let's get started. What have you brought to us today?
All right. So today I brought a card that I have actually played, one that I personally really enjoy. I like playing against it and playing with it. It just produces some really interesting kind of board states. And so the card I'm bringing today is Braids, Arisen Nightmare. It is for 1 generic and 2 black. It's a legendary creature that it's a nightmare. And it's a 3/3, and it has a bit of a wall of text. It says, at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. Currently, I know that it sees play in our local meta. Our friend Ty Guy plays it in Tevesh Kodama, and then also we have a list, a Rafine list that also runs it as well. And a number of our friends in our pod plays that Rafine list, and it's definitely done some work there as well. And it also sees. On CEDH analytics, it sees play in about 300 decks, but no real major events, wins, or top 16s. So I think this is kind of really a fringe card that I have seen kind of come in and out of some of those top 16 decks, but it's not one that they're slotting in for tournaments. But I think this is kind of like the perfect card for us to talk about.
But we have seen it. I definitely remember, and maybe it's a local meta thing, but I've definitely seen it in some mid-rangey, 4-color lists before as some value spice. I've seen it in, I believe it was TNT, and then I think Tevesh Krom? I think I've seen it as well. It's definitely right up our alley. It's something that I don't think is, troll or ridiculous to slot in as one of those, 98th or 99th card in your list. But it doesn't necessarily tend to stay in lists. So it's far away from staple, but not bad. And I think that that's perfect for us to talk about today. So let's get into it. Why don't you start off with our positives for Braids Arisen Nightmare?
So the first part is that, when you look at this card initially, I think a lot of people think oh, it's a great stacks piece. But honestly, I don't actually personally think of it as a stacks piece. I just think of it as a card draw engine. Yes, it's only once per turn, but sometimes you could be stuck in colors that is kind of hurting for some card draw. And not normally with black, I guess, but at the same time, I like to play Rakdos or Mardu, and this card has kind of really fit that really well. And like I said earlier, I'd actually only play this in one deck, but I have copied our friend Ty Guy's Braids before, and I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this card is doing some work for me right now.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of play in our pod specifically, whether it's a Nath list or the Rafine list that's kind of stacksy mid-range that a lot of us like to play. And then the Tevesh Kodama is another list where we've seen it. So of a lot of the steadfast players in our group, we actually see this card quite a bit.
Yeah. And I know Kyle's going to give me a little bit of flack, but I think this is a really good card. It gets you card draw. It can get you card draw as soon as turn 1, right? As long as you're willing to really kind of take that brave leap and sack a land. Because that's my second point, right? It's relatively easy to cast. Yes, it's 2 black pips, but 1 dark ritual on turn 1, it gets you Braids out in play. And even if your turn, if you're last in turn order, being able to kind of potentially force. And here's the thing, I honestly don't think most people are early game going to make any sacrifices. So you're probably going to get that card draw. To me, the life loss is pretty incidental. I think it's just a bonus. It's not what I'm necessarily looking for. It's not as consistent as your Talions, your Sheoldreds, right? And so I don't think this one will eat removal as soon as a Talion or a Sheoldred does, because it's not doing it for every action, right? It's happening once a turn cycle, and where I might get to hopefully get to draw 3, or I'm hopefully removing some pieces that is setting my opponents back, and I think that's again, that's kind of incidental. I'm playing this card for mostly the card draw.
It's funny you bring up Talion, because this is actually in the considering list for my Talion, and I think it's in the considering list of a lot of Talion lists. I haven't ever put it into my main deck, but it's something that I consider pretty consistently, just as another value piece. So, and I did see on CEDH Analytics that a couple of Talion lists were running this card, and I'm sure that there's plenty that have it in the considering or sideboard. So, just because the life gain in those lists kind of go from being incidental to being like part of the game plan, so I can kind of see it being more powerful in those lists.
For me, it's like I played in my Rakdos the Muscle deck. This doesn't see play in Obnick's list, but in Rakdos the Muscle, right? This is such a great synergistic card. It's you can do this on the end step. You're gonna see some more cards. It is on the end step, so it is kind of weird because you're gonna have to play those cards like somehow in the end step. Right, but at the same time, but you don't necessarily have to target yourself with Rakdos the Muscle. You can target somebody else's library and get access to their cards and hopefully take away something from them, right? Because if you're sacrificing creatures, you're getting Rakdos triggers. This card, I think, is really good early game and or late game, right? Because even late game, when there are more resources for somebody to kind of do it, but towards the end game, people are probably like really trying to like find their timing, and they're not going to want to part with some of their resources. And so you can really try to squeeze yourself ahead in card advantage by trying to take away permanents that your opponents may really kind of need. And so I think this is a good card to see early game and a good card to see late game. And then my last point is it kind of really synergizes with a lot of the kind of top commanders out there, right? No, this is not necessarily a card that you're going to see a lot in Tymna Kraum, right? But any color in black can really kind of utilize this. Like I think in Najeela, Tivit, Rakdos the Muscle, obviously, Obnick's, and Korvold.
No. I'm gonna stop you there. There's no way. Maybe some Japanese landfall Korvold list, but I don't know about that.
I do think that there's still synergy with it in terms of being able to just get yourself a little bit more, just again more card draw, and again, like this is for me the big point I'm trying to make is that I don't really see it as a stacks piece. I don't think it's really going to. Most people are just going to say no. They're going to eat the chew damage, right, and give you 3 extra cards in your turn cycle.
Yeah. I will say that the other ones that you did list, I can definitely see some synergy in there. But and even though you say that it couldn't go in Tymna Kraum, I think there's one of those cards that like some Tymna Kraum lists could throw this in just to spice up their list. Like I could see it. I don't necessarily think that this card, like I said, I think that this card is so perfectly on the edge of CEDH fringe that seeing the include in almost any blacklist, you're not necessarily thinking like, oh, that's bad. You just might think like, oh, that's interesting that you run that, you know? So I don't think that you can, just cross out Tymna Kraum as being there. But at the same time, I get it. It's not seeing play. How popular that list is, the percentage number of decks that are going to run this is incredibly low. Like 1%. Yeah.
And my other point with this is like you should consider something like this. I'm not saying if it needs to be this card, but if you're running symmetrical stacks pieces, meaning it's like something that affects everybody, including yourself, you may want to consider something like this to be able to get rid of it if you need to get rid of it, right? Because like how many games have we all sat through where it's like, all right, there's like multiple rule of law effects or something that's kind of like a symmetrical,
like a rest in peace, or like something that's really that's hosing the entire table, or even like a collector roof. I could see that some sort of piece that's shutting everything down. And you're able to close it. Unfortunately, you have to shut it down on your end step. Yep. Which is not ideal.
It's not ideal, but like, you play the piece, and so you gotta somehow be responsible about it, right? I think that's the big thing.
And hopefully, if you're probably playing this in more of, like, this is not a turbo card, so you're probably playing this in some sort of mid-range or control list. So, and if you're in that scenario, if you're in that, there's no way. If you're in that scenario, then maybe you've gained so much value through it that you're in a position where the board state is safe, quote unquote, and you feel like you can survive a round cycle and then be able to win on your turn. I could see that too, but I think that positive that it can kill your stacks piece is pretty small. It's kind of just like a little bonus positive for it. I wouldn't say that you're playing it for that purpose, but it could be like in a niche going into a final fortune. I mean, that's kind of hot, but it's very niche, but I see it.
All right, well, those are the quick, easy points that I've kind of brought to the table. What do you think are some of the downsides that people should consider in terms of before they try to slot this in?
Yeah, all right. I'll put on my devil horns here to be the devil's advocate. So the first one, and it's so funny. So just for the listeners at home, how we plan out these episodes, we kind of just talk about the card early. Well, we don't talk about it. We tell each other what the card's going to be about a week before. And then we will individually make our positives and our negatives. So we don't talk to each other about our positives or negatives until day of.
Right now.
Till now. Right. Till right now. Yeah. And I think it's really funny because a lot of my downsides are very similar to what your positives were, which is fascinating. So the first one that I'll bring up is that the first downside is that I'm not sure if this is a stacks piece or a draw engine. And that might be a bad thing. So make up your mind, right? In CEDH, we want the best of the best cards that fill a particular role. At least that's kind of my mindset for it, is you want the cards to fill a role, and you want that card to be the best thing at filling that role that's possible. And I think that the fact that it's kind of a quote-unquote stacks piece, it's not even really a stacks piece. It's kind of like a slight inconvenience optional stacks piece.
Yeah.
It might stacks you, it might not. It can kind of... It's up to you, which is probably the worst kind of stacks piece that you could possibly have. So I think it's just okay at that. And then the second aspect of it as a draw engine is that it's just okay at that as well. So it's a draw in the end step, which is probably the worst possible time that you can draw a card. I think it might even be worse than drawing on opponent's turn because you're the furthest point away from your main phase as you could possibly be is at your end step. Is how I think about it. So technically, I think it is like time wise, it is the worst time to draw a card because you're the furthest possible away from your main phase as you could be. So it's the worst type of draw you can have. So the draw engine side aspect of it is mid. And the stacksy aspect of it is mid. So now we have a card that does two things okay. And we've talked about cards like this on our podcast before. And it's something that we bring up a lot because, and I think that this is kind of where that mindset between like degenerate EDH or high-powered EDH and CEDH comes in. It's like these kind of cards are really good in lower power EDH lists because you don't know what you're going to go against. You don't know what the meta is going to look like, and it can kind of be versatile in that sense. But for CEDH specifically in our meta, it's so proven of like what is important and what will be effective that a card like this that kind of does multiple things in an okay fashion, I just don't see it as powerful as playing a card that does something really, really, really well because you have a game plan with it. Right. The game plan for this is like maybe draw some cards, maybe slow people down. And I want cards that are going to say slow people down for sure or draw cards for sure. Right. So that's kind of my first thought process is that the versatility, quote unquote, of this card is kind of a downside in a sense that it's not consistent in either thing that it's doing.
Yeah. I mean, I totally get that. But I think that at the end of the day, like, my rebuttal to it is like, yes, it's not ideal in the timing, but card draw is still card draw. Mm-hmm. Sometimes playing cards, like I do personally tend to find myself in decks that don't necessarily draw me a lot of cards, right? I played a lot of Nagila, and so I'm always looking for another source, a Ristic or a Mystic, which is arguably, yes, much better.
It's not arguable. That's not an argument.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, not inarguably. Like it is, they are better cards for sure. They're better cards, but like if you're somehow not in blue and you're looking for card draw, like you're going to take it where you kind of get it from. And this isn't really that bad. Again, being able to at least see 4 cards on your turn at any capacity, right, is kind of just really nice. Again, being stuck before where I'm like only getting to see 1 card during my turn, oof.
Yeah.
Even being able to filter down is kind of huge. And like I said, like I'm willing to potentially eat a land on turn 1 for this because I'm probably going to see 3 more cards.
Interesting. Okay, so that's
the kind of player who I am.
This is a great segue into my second point, which I think is so funny. It's so funny that you just like immediately mentioned that too. It's like, I'm eating a land. Turn 1, I'm eating a land. I'm going for it, right? My second downside is that I actually think it's kind of a non-bow card where there's not really a big benefit to getting it out early because you won't have anything to sack. So if let's say you do what you described earlier, play your land, you Dark Ritual, you cast Braids, go to your end step. Are you really going to sack your land to draw 3 cards?
Yeah, potentially.
We're in CEDH. Your starting hand is going to have 2 lands max. I guess maybe 3 lands max. So now you're putting yourself in a position where, like, okay, I'm going to have a land turn 2. I just don't see it. Like, I honestly,
I wish you guys could see my face right now.
I just don't see it. I think that maybe if you have something like you can throw out like a Mox Opal or a Chrome Mox or something that you can sack, or a Dork that you can sack turn 1 that's just better, like then this becomes way more powerful. But the idea of like, man, land Dark Rit into Braids turn 1 is the best, is so good. I disagree completely.
I'm not saying. I see you're we're working under the impression that we consider me a good CEDH player. If we look at my history of the no, I agree with you. Yes, that is probably not the ideal play, but there's a part of me that like I would see this and I would consider ripping it. I'm being just honest with you. I would absolutely consider it. It's probably not the best, but again, it's something that you're going to be able to come down. You're going to be able to look at more cards, and there are decks that, like decks that play wheels, like that are just going to try to like look for more answers, right? Yes. Hopefully you have more than just a land Dark Rit into this, but again, in decks that are trying to not go turbo, but like, again, just try to dig for answers. There's a word for where I do see it happening. Depending on, again, this whatever you goldfished or whatever you have else have in hand.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a lot better to do that if you're seat 1, like turn 1 seat 1, then it's like, okay, I can kind of see it because you can kind of see the lay of the land.
Almost guarantee it,
second turn. But yeah, it's tough. And like probably the best case scenario for a turn with Braids would be like your seat 4, you rip a Dockside for 5, turn 1 or something like that. Cast Braids and then like
if you're lucky,
and then like sack a treasure to it and then hopefully get that engine going that way, or sack Dockside itself to get that engine going that way. I could see that maybe in like a Mardu list that would be pretty hot turn 1. But yeah, that's my second downside, is just I think it's not necessarily a 100% positive to get this card down early, like turn 1, turn 2. And that's a problem in CEDH because
totally
sometimes
valid.
Our games don't go to turn 3. So that's my second point. My third point against this card is that the ceiling is just too low. So my thought process when I'm thinking about a card where you're going to see potentially, 3 cards on your turn, and it's not ideal of how you're getting the cards, the first thing that came to mind, weirdly enough, was like Sylvan Library, where it's like, well, you're going to draw cards, but it's going to be at a downside. Sylvan Library hits you like a truck, whereas Braids, you have to sack something. So you have this draw engine that's punishing you to draw cards. And for example, like we don't really see Sylvan Library outside of mono green. Maybe you'll see it in some 2 or 3 color lists, like some of the more fringe ones, but I don't see them in like 4 or 5 color lists anymore just because there's better card draw options now. And maybe that's just like ever since One Ring got printed, it's like nobody is yearning for card draw, like consistent card draw anymore. But I think, and I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's where my brain first went, is like, hey, this is kind of like a Sylvan Library type effect where you're like potentially seeing some more cards at a downside, but I just don't think that the Magic Christmas Dreamland of playing this card, having some fodder to sack, and then getting 3 cards is good enough.
Maybe it's because I play. Well, actually, that's not true because you play a lot of like sacrifice your own shit as well. Like, so I definitely know you get it, but like I think it's because I am kind of on. I'm being really high on Rakdos the Muscle right now, and playing a lot of it. It's like this card kind of just really enables a lot of things in that I've just been really kind of geeking out on. And so I totally think your point of it being similar to Sylvan Library is real. Like I think totally, I totally see that. That's a really good example. But I think that being in black, like you're sacking things isn't necessarily like a bad thing, right? It's in a color. It's
good.
It's what it does. And so I think the point that I'm kind of getting from this is like this is one of those cards, and like maybe this is a downside, is like in order to best get value out of this card, you do have to build around this card a little bit. Like when I was looking at my things, I was like, oh, that's a really interesting point. Like in order for me to get a lot of like more upside on this card, I kind of have to build a little bit around it. And so is that why we don't see it so much? Is because in order to get more out of it, you need to maybe have 1 or 2 more cards to kind of make this thing work better.
Yeah, and I see your point. Like, this card can definitely work better if your deck is set up to work with the sacrifice effect.
Yeah.
But then we're getting to a point of like, okay, if you're going to spend more card slots to synergize with Braids to draw cards, you're not inherently winning the game through it, right? Like, if you're going to open up some card slots to make a win line because you feel like your deck only has 1 consistent win line and you need a second, or you feel like it's only 2 and you really want that backup third, like, I could see taking up multiple card slots to change multiple cards to make your deck function better. But if you're just like, I want to play Braids, I want to make Braids better, so I'm going to cut good cards to make it work, then you're starting to force it. In my opinion.
That's
because you're going to be.
I think we're trying to say the same thing.
You're starting to force it. So
yeah.
I definitely see that there could be some synergies, and I agree. I mean, it is a black card that sacrifices things, and sometimes the color pie itself rewards those functionalities. So it could be good. It is kind of weird that and this is kind of like a pseudo 4th point. It is weird that it's like a 3-cost value creature in black, because we don't see a ton of those. Like the last one that's like we see like Oppo and we see like Dothy, but those are like this weird position where those cards are so like game to game, their functionalities are so different, right? Because it depends on what cards you can get out of them. That versatility is almost, it's a consistent versatility because they're so wide-ranging in what they can do, and I don't know that Braids provides that same wide-ranging, like, catch-all versatility.
It's fair. No, totally fair.
The other thing I was kind of thinking of is it kind of reminds me a little bit of, like, a Professional Facebreaker in red, right? Where it's, like, a 3-mana thing that just kind of, like, gets you some value, but it's not necessarily, like, 3-mana combo piece or 3-mana brings you to a line that's going to win the game, or 3 mana stops somebody else from winning the game. So maybe like a Grim Hireling. Is that 4 mana? I think Grim Hireling's 4 mana, but that's just another
Grim
like
4. Yeah,
another 4. Like weird like value piece that doesn't really have like a big home in what it's trying to do.
That's also a really niche-ish card, right? Like you
but that's, I mean, I honestly think it's kind of similar to where Braids is in the meta, where it's kind of like, oh, if you see a Grim Hireling, oh, that's kind of interesting, it's very similar. But that's my last point is like, if you're gonna cut something for this card, it's gonna be one of these other weird incidental value pieces, and you might be getting more incidental value out of a different card. All right, that's my last point. Yeah,
those are great points. I really like those. I'm going to be honest. I actually really liked the discussion on this one. I think that it was a really good discussion. Thanks.
So what point did I make that you think is the best point against Braids?
I think the best point is the ceiling, right? It is kind of a low ceiling. The fact that it is honestly really is similar to a Sylvan Library. So I guess to listeners, like if you consider Sylvan Library a great card and you would run that, boom. You may be high on this.
You got to say though, mono green players, close your ears, because I know that's you guys like Sylvan Library is the best things at sliced bread, but not you guys.
Right, the ceiling probably is a little bit lower on this card. And then I think the other part of it was the the point you made that I actually think was very very good was like that the card draw happens on the point furthest from the beginning of your next turn. I'm not gonna lie, yep. I'm really tickled by that.
It's the worst. It's the worst time to draw a card.
It's that point is I think a really valid point in terms of. You do want to understand the makeup of your library, what you're trying to do with your game plan, and whether or not drawing on an end step matters to you, right? If it does, right, if you're like, oh man, I wish I had drawn this during my turn, maybe not a card for you in your deck.
Yeah, cool.
Same question to you. What point of mind do you think made the best case for putting in Braids?
So I do think that it's probably your second point, which is that it's like relatively easy to cast. Even like quote unquote early game. I will say I'm not a proponent of the heavy amount of confidence that you have to just land Dark Braids, sack a land, YOLO.
YOLO.
I don't think I mean no one will ever question your bravado, but I think maybe
they question my intelligence.
Yeah. But the fact that you can cast this card pretty easily just because you get a lot of black pips, whether it's through like a Cabal Ritual or Dark Ritual. Shoot, if you're doing Sacrifice Effect, maybe even a Culling the Week, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's difficult to cast, and I think it's one of those that really rewards you in those grindy games. So if you know that your meta is really mid-rangey, maybe this is something that you can slot in because it's got that weird edict effect where you potentially could get people to sacrifice their stuff, but at the same time, you're kind of just like edging out small advantages. And that's kind of a positive in this card. It's the classic positive of it's not good enough to be countered. This card isn't good enough to be countered. It really isn't. Like no one's gonna be ripping a Force of Will when they see this card come down. So you're kind of just slowly stoking the fires of your engine and able to get it through, and it's just good enough where you want to play it and not good enough that people will want to counter it, so there's some benefit to that. It's a super mild benefit, and I think that you probably just want to play good cards that should get countered, but I'll give you that. I'll give you the
Well then, let me go ahead and just get this question out of the way since we all know where this is headed. All right, Kyle, what do you think about this card? Were you convinced? What are your thoughts on Braids Arisen Nightmare?
Is Braids Arisen Nightmare a good card?
Question mark?
No. To be honest, the more I was talking about my downsides, the more I was like convincing myself, and I was like thinking to myself, like, man, I'm making good points. Like, like I'm not liking this. So I'm not convinced on this card specifically. I think that it will stay in that weird zone of
I think so too.
Some games this card's gonna do work. And when it does, you're going to be like, yeah, I'm a genius. I'm playing Braids, and it just won me that game because I drew 14 cards, right? But then there's going to be all of those other games where you just wish it was a better card. You wish it was a different card. And not every game is just going to turn out where Braids just gets ultimate super value all the time. Whereas this is CEDH. Most of the time, all your other cards are probably going to be pretty good no matter what game you're playing, right? So, nope, it's not a good card. But I will give credit where credit is due, and I don't think it's troll to play this card.
You heard it here, folks. Don't cut this card. Put it in Barb Servitor.
No, I'm not saying
that's what he's saying. Those are the words. That's what we all heard.
Look, I'm not going to shun people from... This whole podcast is built on Fringe CEDH. Not Fringe CEDH. Okay, so don't go playing real shitty cards. But if you play real shitty cards, I might look at you a little sideways. But try it out. If you're really into this, and let's say that there is a deck that we just don't know about that really, really pushes Braids to another category of good, right? I'm sure those decks exist. I'm sure there's something that, like you said, when you're talking about Rakdos the Muscle, like, I like it. I like being able to have ways to sack things. That's cool. But, at the same time, there's not a ton of prevalence. Maybe there's some sort of Dargo fun shenanigans that you can do. I don't know. But, yeah, where we're at right now in the current meta, in the top 25 lists that I'm looking at, I'm not seeing anything where I'm like, yeah, Braids really rips in that deck. So if I'm wrong, listeners, you know what to do. Down in the comments below, say, I actually disagree with Kyle. Braids is really effing good in blank deck. Please tell me.
If you think Kyle's wrong, do me a favor. Share this with 5 to 10 of your friends. Have them watch this. Like, really
100 of your friends.
Yeah.
A million of them.
Nothing would say screw you, Kyle, more than this video getting to 5,000 views. I would love that. Please.
Now we're view pandering just to prove a point.
Hey,
love that.
For sure. Hey, if the listeners can do that for us, like, it'll be great. All right. I think that's enough time.
Smash that like button to show Kyle he's wrong.
I think all of the listeners that are still with us are now waiting for the next part, the next segment that we do, which is That's a Good Card, ? If you haven't played with us before, I'm about to give Kyle a card. All I'm going to give him is the card name, and then it's going to be up to Kyle to describe the rest of the card. What does it do? What kind of card is it? What's the mana cost? All of the above, including the flavor text. If you would like to play along with him after I give you the card name, go ahead and pause, make your own guesses, write it down. Let's see how you compare to Kyle.
Yep. All right, let's do it. I'm ready for it. What obscure Magic card do you got for me today?
I don't think it's obscure. I think it's actually
what? I have a
possibly, chance. You may have a chance because it's gonna be like you're gonna be like, oh man, I should know this. The card is Dothy Trapper.
Oh, I was really hoping you'd just say Dothy Voidwalker, and then I would have the trouble of trying to read off that wall of text from memorization, because there's no way I would do it proper.
That's a different good game. That's also a really
game,
good game.
Yeah, just name a staple. Yeah.
Trapper.
Dothy Trapper. Okay, so it's a creature. Dothy. I think that's the type of creature. Yeah, so creature type, Dothy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it is. Shit, I don't know. Okay, so Dothy is like, I think it's either blue or black. I think that's the colors. We'll stick with Dothy Voidwalker style. So we'll say it's a 1 colorless, 1 black pip. So 2 mana cost creature. Let's say it is a 2/1. Let's say it's probably got shadow too. Let's give it shadow. Why not? Let's give it shadow. So it's a 2/1 with shadow for 2. And Dothy Trapper says, whenever a creature you control dies, target player mills a card.
Oh, wow. That's not bad. That would be that's hot.
That's what I'm going with. Let's talk about the art here. The Dothy Trapper, they got on some like garb that's kind of like ninja-esque. It's got shadow, so it's probably got like I'm thinking like some sort of black linen clothes. It might look kind of leather linen with maybe some intricacies on some shoulder pads. We'll give it a cool hat. Say it's like triangular or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's standing there with like a blade in its hand and like a hunter's bear trap over its shoulder because it's a trapper. I don't know. Some sort of trap over its shoulder. And maybe there's another one behind it that's like setting a trap. I'm going to do that too. Throw in a little bit of, like a different Dothy Trapper that's in the background that's like setting it up.
Flavor text.
Yeah, flavor text. We're rocking with the best trappers in the world are the ones that live in the shadows. Quote.
Like Quote.
Ob Nixilis. Yep. You were to
honestly,
hear, folks.
I'm gonna give you let's see, out of a score of 10, I think you scored like a good. I think it's a good 5.5 out of 10.
Okay, I mean I got some things right. It's a creature.
Yeah.
Let's go
for sure. Okay. Dothy Trapper is 2 colorless and a black pip. So again, I think you were pretty damn spot on there.
Damn.
Only one pip off.
One
right?
off.
It is, again, it's a creature, Dothy minion. I'm going to give that to you for sure. Like, it's a Dothy.
I missed the minion. Yeah.
Yeah. It is a 1/1. Again, just a 2/1 to 1/1. Again, you were right there.
One off of everything.
Shadow. So funny you mentioned that.
It does have shadow?
Oh, no. Well, okay, here you go. Ready? It is activation cost. Tap it. Tap Dothy Trapper. Target creature gains its shadow until end of turn. Reminder text is this creature can block or be blocked by only creatures with shadow. So it gives something else shadow.
It can give itself shadow.
Yes, it could give itself shadow, technically.
It could.
You just got to tap it.
Yeah.
Merfolk tell their young of Dandan, humans of Ragman. Dal tell tales of the Dothy, and they are far worse.
Oh,
That's the flavor text. Yeah, I know.
Is there
really
a quote?
creepy.
Do we know who said that? Was it Ob Nixilis?
No, it was not. There was no. It is not. And I'm sending you
wrong.
the card right now. And actually, I feel like you were fairly in the right realm with like
with the art.
With the art, it was shadowy.
It's not. That was not what I was imagining whatsoever.
No, really?
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Oh man, when you were describing it, I was like, okay, this is okay.
It doesn't have a blade in its hand and a trap over the shoulder. No, I lose.
Actually.
I get negative points for the. Yeah, I get negative points for the art here, but that's a fun one. That's a fun one. Thank you so much for listening today to our episode on Braids, Arisen Nightmare. Please direct your attention down below to our links to our link tree, where you can find everywhere we host this podcast, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And don't forget to leave a comment down below with your suggestion for our next card. We appreciate your support and hope to see you next Monday. Thank you.
Thanks. Share this with your friends. Bye.